Very warm, very warm welcome from the Christian Science Student Center Foundation at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name is Marty Evanson. I'm the chair of the Student Center's board, and what a privilege it is to be part of the team responsible for providing a well-located sanctuary of living, learning, inspiration, and healing for students. Let me just describe how the day is going to go. Or in the hour and a half we're together. According to the bylaws of our organization, I'll give a brief annual report, talk about finances a little bit. I'll introduce our house manager, we'll say a few words. And then from there, we will have our presenter, Michael Hamilton, executive manager of the Mary Baker Eddy Library, who will give the main presentation. So let me begin. Our organization nurtures the cause of Christian Science by supporting and underwriting activities of Christian Science student organizations. 2, we provide low-interest higher educational loans to Wisconsin-based Christian Scientists. This educational loan program was created by the bequest from H. Gladys Swope, a former professor at UW-Madison. We offer informational and other opportunities related to Christian Science, such as today's presentation. We host the Wisconsin Committee on Publication Office and an annual Christian Science Association. We issue a spring and fall newsletter each year, so let us know if we can include you in our electronic or paper copy newsletter list. 4, we sponsor a residential community named Concord House, consisting of 7 dormitory-like rooms for students who agree to maintain a quiet, substance-free, and moral lifestyle. Let me segue into the treasurer's report. Menega Tax and Financial handles our payroll and tax functions. Volunteer accountant Steve Gordon completes their annual tax-exempt federal report and financial audit. And I'm happy to report that the just completed annual audit found everything to be in order. Amelia Talbert and our house manager handle the foundation's bookkeeping and SWOPE educational loan accounts. Now, for the 12 months that ended on June 30th, 2022, which is the end of our fiscal year, we had $71,740 in income, which was $24,000 more than last year. Donations during the period totaled $18,573. Now, our expenses totaled $56,751, about the same as last year. In addition, we had major heating and air conditioning improvements, and those were completed and paid for just after our fiscal year ended. That work came to about $58,000. And a couple large donations came in a very timely manner. So indeed, divine love always has met, always will meet every human need. That's Mary Baker Eddy and Science and Health Wiki to the Scriptures. Our invested assets total about $182,000. That's about the same as last year's amount, which is pretty good given the vagaries of the market. Now, we talked briefly before about the SWOPE educational loans. And as of the end of June, we had 4 active student educational loans valued at $21,108. Now, the available assets for loans are $266,000, and those loans can be lent out at a pretty low interest rate of 1.37% for undergraduate and 2.15% for graduate. So please spread the word about this terrific resource for Wisconsin-based Christian Scientists attending accredited colleges. And by the way, 2 freshmen took out loans this past summer, so we now have 6 active loans. The Concord House manager position is of utmost importance to our organization. Since May 2020, Kathleen Mitchner has been our very capable house manager. Her many successes have been in recruiting residents and parking renters, interacting with students, vendors and contractors, and ensuring the building is well maintained. We really appreciate the spiritual approach she deploys in all her activities. Kathleen, would you like to say a few words?
Thanks, Marty. Very warm welcome to everyone and to Michael. And I know we really look forward to what you will be sharing with us today and what we can take away from that. I just wanted to take a moment to, reflect on the achievements and rewards since my arrival in 2020. The achievements really are the result of much cooperation with the board, vendors, the community publication, the city of Madison, and Norman Bear, who spearheaded our HVAC renovation work. And I also want to share some other wonderful things from over the past couple of years in regards to being engaged with the residents. To your comments, that some have taken time to browse books and periodicals in our Christian Science library here in the facility and around the building. A former resident shared how much he enjoyed the Christian Science Monitor and found it useful in his studies and working with other groups. He and some other former residents have stated that Concord House felt like home. Some current residents have commented on how glad they were they found this place, and one recently stated that they felt it has been good for their mental health. And another resident that's here has been playing some Christian Science hymns on the piano that we have down here on the office floor. And then over the summer, some exiting residents, which was very touching, bestowed some unexpected gifts of appreciation in various forms. In working with the vendors and contractors, some impositions have been lifted in regards to Christian Science in our facility, as well as when I utilize Lyft drivers. Many people have commented that it's wonderful to have this kind of facility, a place where they feel residents can have a sounder sense of principles and, providing an environment that's based on these higher principles and bringing needed structure to students' work and study experiences. And over this past year, I also began serving as the reading room librarian. And I have found what's really nice about this too, it really is not disconnected from the work I do here. Because in looking at the rich resources, there's a cross-functional purpose. We have a lovely display window here in the facility, and I'm working with Gordon to set up a digital display that can be shared from the mother church, because we have a lot of foot traffic with university students. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and Marty, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Appreciate your work. And again, another shout out to Norman Bear, who's been a volunteer extraordinaire to help us keep the building in good shape. So Norm, thank you for being here today and for all of your work and dedication over the past year. Appreciate it so much. We have a board of directors that are very active, and the current board members include Bill Kilgore, Gordon Myers, Lee Sorensen, Lindsay Roeder, and Margie Kurtz. Our bylaws provide for up to 12 board members, and if you would like to serve in this capacity, please contact us via email at csomadison@gmail.com. Board members can live anywhere in the US, as we regularly meet on Zoom. Much appreciation to our current board members and all the house managers and members and donors who previously served the cause of Christian Science on this campus through our organization for over 71 years. As it says in Psalms, "Blessed be the Lord who daily loadeth us with benefits, even the Lord of our salvation." So with that, are there any questions or comments regarding the Student Center Foundation? Again, you can use the chat or back channel us if you'd like to ask something later on. with that, it's always a pleasure because each annual meeting that we have, we usually have a presenter. And this year, we're so pleased that Michael Hamilton, the executive manager of the Mary Baker Eddy Library, agreed to meet with us today. Michael Hamilton came to the position following 10 years in the religion and philosophy department at Principia in Elsa, Illinois. Prior to teaching, he served for 20 years as an active duty U.S. Navy chaplain, ministering to units in both the Navy and Marine Corps. He holds a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and his research and writing focus is on American religions. So higher education seems to be a very important part of Michael Hamilton's life. And so we're looking forward to hearing him talk about the Mary Baker Eddy Library and how it can support us. So Michael, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Marty, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share a few things about the library and its work, and then welcome questions. And depending on your questions or thoughts you want to share, that'll help to direct us in our time. I'll be mindful of our time limit too, and make sure that I don't go over. I think some of you are familiar with the Mary Baker Eddy Library, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts, but which strives to have a worldwide presence through its online activities, through its website, and so on. But before I get into the activities of the library, I just want to share a couple of things from well, first from the Bible, this verse that means a lot to me, and I'm sure to some of you. This is from Isaiah. The Lord God hath given me the tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak a word in season to him that is weary. He wakeneth morning by morning. He wakeneth mine ear to hear as the learned. It's interesting to me that it's really God here who is giving the tongue of learning to man and woman. And I think sometimes at the library, what we find ourselves doing is trying to understand the connection between academic learning, academic sources, and their spiritual foundation and spiritual needs. So I came across this brief paragraph in Miscellaneous Writings by Mary Baker Eddy, which talks about a kind of learning that at least at first doesn't look academic, but is a kind of life learning that I think touches the academy as well as every other part of life. And it's this: who hath not learned that when alone, he has his own thoughts to guard, and when struggling with mankind, his temper, and in society, his tongue? We also have gained higher heights, have learned that trials lift us to that dignity of soul which sustains us, and finally conquers them, and that the ordeal refines while it chastens. So this is, to me, kind of lifts the discussion of learning and even lifelong learning to a whole new level, and points out that what learning is, of course, has its foundation in each individual's relation to God. And I think what Kathleen shared about the residents at Concord House speaks to that, how they're touched in different ways by what you have to offer. The library has, through its website, offered some information about itself. I'm just sharing my screen right now. Can everybody see it?
Yes, we can see it fine.
Yeah, you don't have to follow along on the screen, but it's here if you would like to. I'm just going to scroll down to our mission, and it's, like most missions are, fairly simple. The library provides public access to original materials and educational experiences about Mary Baker Eddy, the ideas she advanced, her writings, and the institutions she founded and their healing mission. We do that by working in 5 main areas. And you'll see those over on the right side of your screen. I won't go through them all in detail, but we work in the area of communications, a project called the Mary Baker Eddy Papers, which I'll be talking with you about just a little bit more, through programs that we put on, events, online and live for children and for adults, through our research and reference services, which is probably the part that connects most closely to academic endeavors and to scholarship. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then through our records management and special collections, which is the kind of back end work that makes research and reference services and our programs possible. So I'm going to just stop sharing for a minute and say that the library is pretty young. It's just existed and been open to the public for about 20 years, but it's based on a collection that is almost as old as the Christian Science movement. And so we're drawing on decades of records related to our cause. And those include centrally the correspondence of Mary Baker Eddy, both the outgoing correspondence by her and incoming correspondence to her. Also to the organizational, we also hold the organizational records of the Mother Church from its founding until today. We have records from many branch churches and Christian Science organizations. And of course, these things wouldn't be very useful if they weren't publicly available for people to use. And so one of our principal missions is to make these resources available to inquirers of all kinds, the general public, but also to academics, researchers, scholars of all kinds, and of course to Christian Scientists wherever they are. One thing that I thought might be of interest to everyone here would be to ask and at least in part answer the question as to what Mary Baker Eddy thought about higher education. What did she think of colleges and universities? As many of you know, she did not have the opportunity to have a college or university education herself. And I can talk about that in just a moment, because Mary Baker Eddy was not uneducated, but her educational opportunities had been constrained by her time and place. But specifically, in answering that question, what did Eddy think about higher education for her followers, both women and men? There is an exchange that we've found in a reminiscence by one of her early students, Anna B. White Baker. Baker had been castigated, or I guess wouldn't be too strong a word, by another Christian Scientist who had told her that secular education would conflict with the purity of Christian Science. And so Baker brought that question to Mary Baker Eddy and asked her if she agreed that higher education in some ways conflicted with Christian Science. And what Baker recorded is this: "No," she, Mary Baker Eddy, said with emphasis, "I wish every student I have had a college education. I want them to be able to talk intelligently with educated, thinking people everywhere." Of course, Mary Baker Eddy does write about academics in her published writings, but I think that brief exchange that she has with Anna B. White Baker is pretty important. And I just read that one sentence again. "I wish every student I have had a college education. I want them to be able to talk intelligently with educated, thinking people everywhere." Mary Baker Eddy, as mentioned, had not had the opportunity for a college education, and that's pretty understandable. Remember that she was born in 1821, and the very first higher education institutions for women weren't founded until after her birth in the United States, where those colleges began to spring up in New England. So while she herself didn't have that opportunity, it's interesting that one of the most important influences in her early life, her brother Albert Baker, distinguished himself because of his academic success, which then led on to success in his profession and in public service. As many of you know, Albert was older than Mary. He was a student at Dartmouth College when she was in her tweens and teens, but he brought home school books on his breaks, and according to Mrs. Eddy, in later years, tutored her and shared books with her. And of course, that tutoring and sharing was not without some risk, because Mark Baker, their father, had reservations, not about education as a whole, but about what was appropriate for women, and more specifically for his daughter, Mary. Part of that was probably born out of very well-meaning concern, because in trying to understand the illnesses that plagued her as a child and young woman, part of what they had been told was that she needed to be kept out of school because her brain was too big for her body. And so the question of what effect learning might have on her was a real and live one. But she was hungry for learning and gained academic education both through working with her older brother and through her own attendance, first at the local district school, which was no great shakes. It was a one-room schoolhouse with children of all ages, in the winter terms at least, huddled together because of the cold. But it was school, and New England was a place, of course, where the idea of the common school, a school for every person that they could attend without paying, was born. But the common school only went so far, about to what we would call middle school today, if that far. And it was succeeded for those who wanted to further their education by fee-paying schools when Mary was a child and a teenager. And these bore various names such as seminary and academy. They were seminaries, but not in the contemporary or religious sense that we often think of as seminaries today. They were institutions for mainly secular education, although they were sometimes, perhaps even often, sponsored by churches or principled by ministers. And Mary and her sisters, Abigail and Martha, all had the opportunity to attend these academies. By modern standards, their attendance was irregular and somewhat spotty. School terms were not regulated in the way that we think of them as being now. But Mary did establish a good record in the academies that she attended. And she felt that several of the people she came in contact with as instructors at those academies were important influences in her life. The Reverend Richard Rust was one. Miss Sarah Bodwell, a teacher, was another. And Mary's respect for educators was something that started early, and I think there you can point to her parents and their regard for educators, and also for an educated ministry, since they were very interested in and participants in religion in the Congregational Church, which emphasized an educated clergy. Sometimes the Congregationalists who were by that time forced into partnership with some of the more newly arrived religions in the area, such as the Methodists and the Baptists, looked askance at those new groups because their clergy, they felt, were not sufficiently educated, where the Congregationalists valued the idea of book learning for ministers. So out of this kind of mix, Mary Baker Eddy emerged as a woman with curiosity, with some education, and of course, as a nascent writer. It looks as though she always thought of herself as a writer from early childhood, as well as a pretty voracious reader. But what we see along the way, of course, is that her own life takes a number of turns, almost all of them unexpected, after her brief first marriage when her husband dies. And she finds herself on a path that is not one that is rooted in academic education, but if you will, kind of in the school of hard knocks. She finds herself thrown in contact with people of all educational levels. People have sometimes kind of wondered how her own family would have been thought of in their society, partly because early biographers of Eddy had tended to put her family down, calling them poor, illiterate, and thereby discrediting her. I think we know now, whatever one were to think of Mary Baker Eddy, or even of her discovery, Christian Science, that's not an accurate description of her family. There is a great degree of egalitarianism in the village life of 19th century New England. There is not the rigid sort of social hierarchy that starts to develop when Mary is a young woman and industry starts to penetrate that area with, especially with the textile mills that bring in many immigrants and start to create kind of divides between people educationally and socially. Her childhood and youth really come before that starts to impact her area. And so she grows up and in a family that is very much part of the life of their community, but who are considered people of standing. In this period, this isn't necessarily about wealth. It's about a sense of respect, the currency of small town life then and now, and of academic life in some ways then and now. Her father holds many different offices in the town, and it's interesting in the records, instead of always being referred to as a kind of yeoman farmer, which is what he was, he farmed several hundred acres, which had been originally awarded to his family earlier because of their role in the Indian Wars in the early 18th century. He's often referred to as Squire Baker, which is a title of status. But that doesn't mean that the Bakers were somehow at a remove from the people around them. If anything, their status and the respect with which they were held made them even more generous, more involved, more integrated into their community. And that's the world that Mary came from. Much more, of course, complicated than that. But in terms of education, that's part of the world she came from. And you can see why 60 years later, when she's asked if a college education would conflict with the teachings of Christian Science, she's so, at least according to the reminiscence of Anna White Baker, so emphatic. No, I wish every student I have had a college education. I want them to be able to talk intelligently with educated, thinking people everywhere. And not to draw too direct of a line, but in some ways, that's what the Mary Baker Eddy Library is all about. not about a college education, because of course we're glad to serve people of all levels of educational attainment, but we want to be able to talk intelligently and with educated thinking people everywhere. And of course, as we all know, educated thinking people are not limited to those with college degrees by any means. But in doing that, the library has found a kind of unique niche in the Christian Science movement and its activities. I have some things to share with you about those activities, but before I do that, I've talked for a few minutes. Has anything I've said raised any questions for you, or anybody want to make any comments, bring out anything? Maybe you just need to stretch and wiggle your toes. I see Kathleen.
I'll keep this brief, Bill. I was just wondering, I was, what's been kind of growing in my thought is that, the library is also being a wonderful resource to point, like high school students of Christian Science and college students, to bring them a greater depth of knowledge and closer to Mary Baker Eddy, as the founder and discoverer of Christian Science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if you have an idea of, how many Christian Science students are doing that, or if they were doing that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question, Kathleen. I thank you for that thought. I could mention a couple of things. This isn't just students, but one of our main functions is to answer people's questions. People send us questions through a form on our website, a research form. They email us, they call us. And when I first got to the library about 8 years ago and saw this stream of questions coming in, I thought, well, surely there's just a finite number of questions and a finite number of questioners. But that has not proved to be the case. We receive, usually at least 100 questions a month, sometimes a good deal more. We're kind of rejoicing in the holidays right now, because sometimes right around Thanksgiving, things will slow down a little bit because we will start getting snowed in. We have a staff of researchers, and most of them have at least 20 to 30 questions in their research queue to answer for people. Some of those questions do come from students, high school and college, people who are working on projects. And I guess let me just show you a couple things that I think you could recommend to a student who was either just for their own interest or working on a project where they'd like to know more about Mary Baker Eddy. The thing I want to point out on our website that's probably really obvious up here where my finger is pointing, this that says Mary Baker Eddy. This is a really good resource on Mary Baker Eddy, her life and achievements. And you can see that it's divided up into 4 categories. And this is designed to help someone who just needs, 20 seconds of information, and someone who needs a lot more. And so let me just walk you through it real quickly. If you see the menu, the drop-down menu, the first place a student could go would be just to this quick read. This is for that high school student or college student who just needs to mention Mary Baker Eddy and make sure he or she knows what she's talking about. It's just this simple, with a paragraph about her and some key dates. But we find that many people, once they know something about her, say, this is an amazing person, many of whom have never heard of her before. And so we offer a deep read. And pardon me, I know scrolling is good and scrolling is bad. It seems like it's all either too slow or too fast. The website, of course, is always available to you, but what you'll see here is that we have a more in-depth but still readable in 20 minutes biography of Mary Baker Eddy. And let me just point out a couple of things about it. It's her life, it's her writings, and then it's her church today to try and unite past with present. What I want to point out to you on this page that you can come back to later is that for a more serious academic researcher, one of the things that we offer here in this upper corner, and this is, by the way, many Christian Scientists who they're not don't find themselves in an academic setting are also interested in. This is an annotated chronology of Mary Baker Eddy's life. The reason I mention this, and I'll just show it to you briefly, this is something that anyone can download, and it's really a biography as chronology. This is about life events surrounding Eddy's life. And what you'll find here, and this is an academic resource as well as one of general interest, you see that it's littered with footnotes. And so what you'll find here is source information on every aspect of Eddy's life. Why would that be important? What we find is that besides a paucity, a lack of information about Mary Baker Eddy, her life and her ideas, there's also just persistent mis- and disinformation about her that has found its way through, the streams of publication, and especially in the academy for many decades. We want to see that leavened by the resources of the library. Oh, sorry, I'm going to share again if that's okay. I promise not every answer to every question will have to be this long. Let me just adjust this here. Get back to the screen I want to show you, and then I'll share again. Okay, here goes. So that drop-down menu also includes, as you saw, a page about her writings, and I just show that to you briefly because I want to also show you the final tab here. This is a page that's been unexpectedly useful in some ways, because Mary Baker Eddy, some people would say, above all things, she is an author. She was a writer. That's certainly not all she was. We know her as the discoverer and founder and leader of the Christian Science movement. But one way the public accesses her is as a writer. And so here again, sorry for the scroll, the good and bad of that. We just touch on everything that she wrote and tell people a little bit about it. But we don't only want to talk about what she wrote, we want to talk about what people have written about her. This is a nice resource for anyone, including students, but also any person interested in Eddy's life. Sorry, the dog's barking. She must be interested. And these are the biographies written about Mary Baker Eddy. People have been writing about her for about the past 130 years or so. And as you know, they've written what we might think of as good things, bad things, balanced things, critical things, adoring things, all of it. And what this page does is to give people resources for understanding what's been written about her. For instance, here we have a brief annotation of one of the most critical biographies ever written about Mary Baker Eddy by Edwin Frandon Dakin. We try and be really balanced about how we present critical material, not defensive, but simply informational and accurate, which is more than we could say sometimes for the people we're writing about, but we want to be fair. But we then have information about more sympathetic biographies and so on. So just pointing that out as the kinds of resources that series of pages on Mary Baker Eddy is one that gets a fair amount of use. We of course, we'd like to see more traffic on our website because most people, can't come to Boston and see us. But we're doing fairly well. I mean, I think we see about maybe 14,000 visits to our website every month, between 12 and 16,000 visits. It goes up and down, but there is interest, there is access, the questions are constant. Take heart if you're ever in a situation like, probably most of us are in your own community church, that, wow, my church is small, not too many people seem to know about us. Does anybody care? Is anybody interested? If you ever need a little bit of reassurance there, yeah, people are interested. Now, of course, then there's a whole lot of other questions to answer between that and our church and our movement. I know that, but if it helps, yeah, there's a lot of questions, a lot of interest. Most people who come to us with questions, occasionally somebody might be a little pugilistic, but that's rare. Mostly people just wonder things, and that includes the general public and Christian Scientists. Kathleen, that was more than you ever bargained for when you spoke up. Sorry about that.
It's wonderful, Michael. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments people want to make before we stroll? I'm not.
Michael, I just have a question. This is Lindsay.
Lindsay.
And I've talked to Margaret, our COP, about this a few years ago too. And the concern, I guess, that I have is about the website Wikipedia,
Yes.
where people go online and they can kind of write anything. And in order to correct misconceptions, you have to be an authorized source where they won't accept, your corrections. So I was just wondering, is there any plan between the COP office in Boston and the Mary Baker Eddy Library to be able to take hold of that Wikipedia entries and to be able to have like an authorized or more official, more correct response on there to clear up some of those misconceptions? Because if I try to do it, I can't. I'm not an authorized source,
Mhm.
But I was just wondering if anyone's tried to, if there's been any plans or anything like that to be able to bring to the public's attention what is real.
Yeah, that's a great question, series of questions, Lindsay. I can comment on it, and we can use your prayerful support with this, because we have looked at this. There are a few different angles of approach here. One is one we find. I'll talk to you if there's time in just a little bit about what we publish about the history of the Christian Science movement and about Mary Baker Eddy. One of our main initiatives is that on our website, we do publish articles in several different categories, and I'll just share a brief overview of that with you all in just a short time. And one of the purposes for that, of course, is to be able to tell our own story, and yet to tell it in a way that's factual, thoughtful, accessible to. We've got a lot more to learn about that, but that's what we're learning to do. And what that means, of course, is that when somebody Googles Mary Baker Eddy Christian Science, we find ourselves on the first screen, so that the library is there as a source of information. But it is true that it always appears behind Wikipedia. That's the top. And the Committee on Publication has had more to do with this than the library has, although we've collaborated about what the best approach is over the years. one of the limitations, similar to what you mentioned, Lindsay, is that until rather recently, one of the things that Wikipedia required of its editors, and as you know, an editor is not someone employed by Wikipedia. That's a separate category. An editor can be someone who is authorized to work in Wikipedia. They have been fairly vigilant in requiring that editor not be employed by an entity that has a sort of sponsoring relation with what they're writing about. So hard for an employee of the Church of Christ Scientists like me to be allowed to be an editor and write in Wikipedia. But we've seen, I think there has been some loosening of that, partly because this has not been something that people have, I wouldn't say, honestly, this isn't about Christian Scientists, but just in general, as you know, you can go on Wikipedia and read certain pieces and you realize, surely this was written by someone who is, you'll see, especially for political figures, you realize this is written by, someone, a close supporter, if not an employee of someone's campaign, for instance. So we think there may be more opening coming. One approach that has been taken that has had some success has been to try and improve what is written about the larger world of Christian Science and Christian Scientists, because there's a lot on Wikipedia that touches on our movement and on our leader. So for instance, I guess it was last year, there was, just a quiet initiative to improve the Wikipedia entry on Robert Peel, Mary Baker Eddy's, one of her biographers, probably her preeminent biographer still. It was not a very good page, and it was not just a stub, it was misleading. And that was something that they were able to do. As you know, because editing in Wikipedia is crowdsourced, to some extent, that's not quite right, but it draws on many different authors. After I write something in Wikipedia and put in more accurate information, someone else, of course, can come behind me and then unbalance the narrative. So you're in this kind of constant conversation. I think that with Mary Baker Eddy, there's been some improvement on her page. And I don't think her page will ever present her, say, just as a Christian Scientist would present her. And to me, as I think you're probably thinking too, Lindsay, that's not the goal. It's just to have a balanced appraisal. There are some things that could be, matters of argument, where you'd want to present, this side of it about Mary Baker and that side. But that's different than the stuff that's blatantly false.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of weird to have what you see with Mrs. Eddy sometimes, and this is breaking down, I think, in a really positive way across at least the publishing spectrum. But what you still see is, it's weird that you would see primary, references to her sourced to things written in 1929. There's been a lot written since then, but good and bad. But so this is part of what we're seeing, is that some of the oldest stuff, which was, pretty polemical in nature, has had a long shelf life, a really long shelf life. Sometimes we responded to that, our movement, I think, over the decades in better ways, sometimes in worse ways. We've at sometimes just felt so put upon that we get too defensive, and that doesn't work. We've all experienced this in our own lives. So I think we're trying to mature to the place we can respond thoughtfully, factually, and with Wikipedia. The reason when I say I can't say is not because I know something that I can't say, but I can't say because I'm not updated. I know that through the committee in the last year, there's been a more robust initiative to try and really work with these pages. So that's kind of what I know.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, there's more to come. You know,
Yeah.
that's the good and the bad of Wikipedia. It's like a living thing, and so it's never done.
Yeah, well, hopefully most people know that, it is not a
Right.
perfect source, It's just the way that the Google search engine results pages work is that it's with their algorithm, it's always going to show up at the top of the page. And so until they change
Yeah.
how they do things.
All of you who are teachers or research, it's kind of a moving target, where should students be, allowed to quote Wikipedia, to cite it and all that. So it's all there, and with kind of surprisingly different results about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school and college, the internet it was just brand new. And so it was kind of like a last resort if you were writing a paper.
You know it.
You had to source it just properly of where you got it from, but it was not at that time a credible source. And of course, here we are only 20 years later, and now it's like this end all be all as it's
Sometimes.
Credible source. And how did it evolve into being a credible source when nothing's really changed? It's just gotten more popular.
One thing we'll sometimes encourage people if they're, in Wikipedia, we don't try and, we want them to see our resources, don't scold them as often. It's the references at the bottom, but even those, that's where that timeline of biographies I shared with you a few minutes ago can be helpful. So you're harvesting all this reference material for a student writing a paper. Well, wait, what's the viewpoint of this source or that source? And that's what we want to help people understand through that timeline of biographies.
Yeah.
Bill.
We regularly see the statement that Mary Baker Eddy is the discoverer and founder of Christian Science. It seems to me that does us a disservice. It suggests that Christian Science is a very recent invention instead of scientific Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's referring to, the discoverer is referring to Christian Science. And the founder is to the movement, the cause. But a casual reader wouldn't see that difference. How do you feel we should respond to that?
Bill, it's funny you mentioned that. This came up just recently with a questioner who contacted us, who asked the same thing. So this is on people's minds. I think maybe one of the most important things is probably just what you said, just, to have an awareness. And that's the great discipline, I think, of, being a student of Christian Science, is you have to think and, push against the tendency that at least I might have to sometimes just take things for granted, or, say the words without thinking about their meaning. And so if you're aware that there's a potential kind of confusion or a misapprehension there, that might mean that one would want to more thoughtfully use those terms. When this question came up, gosh, I guess it was just last week, the most recent iteration of it, I've given myself an assignment to look carefully at Mrs. Eddy's own self-references along that line. And so it's a work in progress for me. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, except to say, I think really important to think, be thoughtful about how we're going to use terms. What will they mean to people who maybe don't know us well? And the nice thing is, whenever I stop and do that, it deepens it for me. I can become more thoughtful. So yeah, thank you. We find a not unrelated question around that term leader. Such a fraught term, in society today. It's kind of we seem to be of two minds, in our culture around the word leader. we hunger for them and we hate them. It doesn't, it's sort of a strange paradox. So we try and be thoughtful, and we have, researched this term leader. What did it mean? What does it mean? I mean, part of this, of course, is a metaphysical question, but there's also a historical question embedded in it that we care about and we've looked at. So
I appreciate the discussion because I've been coming up against this a lot as a reader in a branch church.
Mhm.
And there's definitely, opinions of the congregation about those three terms.
Yes.
And when we're announcing her name, what is acceptable to say and what's not acceptable. And there is such a wide variety, even within our own movement, of
Yes.
which terms we should be using and how we should be using them. So I know I also have been praying a lot about, if I say leader, am I being offensive, or just, I think maybe if each of us here, can really get into the metaphysics behind it. And I really looked into that word leader, and I don't have it in front of me, but I have a list of qualities of what a leader really is. And again, it's not what one would think necessarily from a spiritual perspective. And I think just knowing tenderly your audience and how and when to use those terms is definitely something I know I wrestle with as well.
On our website, we have, and as I say, what I'm referred to with our articles is sometimes just sort of part of the equation, not the whole thing, but we have an article on our website about the development of that term leader in reference to Mary Baker Eddy. And the research actually really surprised me in some ways. So if you guys want to, this might be a good jumping off place for me to just share with you some of what we publish. I know some of you are more familiar with this than others, and I won't take you on a long tour. I just want to let you know for your own future use what we do. Would it be okay if I shared screen and we just looked at that for a minute?
Go for it, Michael.
All right. Let me just get where I need to be on the website and then share my screen. Hold on. Yeah, one of our core values at the library is free inquiry. And so we're constantly trying to, balance what many of us do, and that's to share something you really care about, and yet to do it in a way that allows people to reach their own conclusions. And sometimes we hit the mark on that better than others, but we keep at it. And part of what free inquiry means is open access. And this has been a pretty big change, for Christian scientists and for people who care about Christian science or are interested in studying it. Up until about the year 2000, most things in the archives of the Mother Church were not open to the public. And there were many different ideas about what was in those archives. Was there, information that might be harmful to Mary Baker Eddy? That was, I think, for Christian scientists, probably the big concern. There's been a very kind of poignant, but also sometimes difficult desire on our part to protect her. And there's part of this to me that is right, but there's part of it that is maybe sometimes misinformed about what that would actually mean. Sometimes what we find is in answering people's questions and writing about on this subject, it's to let her speak, and to let that voice come through. One thing I should mention that sometimes goes without mention is that the library's mission is, I won't read it to you again, I did that, but it is to bring to public attention the life and achievements of Mary Baker Eddy but it is also to bring to public attention the life and activities of the Christian Science movement throughout its history up to the present day. One of the, I feel, the most important things we can do is to show that Mary Baker Eddy's achievements extended beyond her lifetime, and that the Christian Science movement, through its, its ups and its downs, its struggles and its victories, has persisted for over 110 years since her death, and will continue from everything we can see through storm and calm. We do seem to have a way of sticking with things. There's been a lot of thick and there's been a lot of thin, and here we are. So one of the tabs here is articles, and the library posts articles regularly on its website that many people access and are the basis for people's questions. These articles are divided up into categories, and I just want to briefly share with you what those are. These include, and I'll just go down our list of women of history. We look at untold stories of women who have many different kinds of connections to Christian Science. The last woman that we profiled is more of an insider story. This is a woman who is well known to many Christian Scientists, but we wanted to have a chance to explore more about who she was and what made her what she was and what her contribution was. Iva Mika Walter, who was the third woman to serve on the board of directors, probably best known to Christian Scientists as a prolific writer. But we profile everything from an Iva Mika Walter to women you have never heard of if you're a Christian Scientist or if you're not. That quote that I drew from about Mrs. Eddy's advocacy for higher education for her followers comes from an article all about a woman, a preeminent early American scholar. She was, I believe, the sixth woman well, I should say her name, Florence Alden Gregg, was the sixth woman to receive a PhD from from Radcliffe, after Radcliffe began awarding PhDs. She was a classical language scholar and was a translator from the Italian of some Renaissance works. She had an academic career, and she was a Christian Scientist. She was just completely unknown to us in the library as well as anywhere else. And yes, of course, her story is in some ways a niche one, but it also shows, there's a case of a woman whose life impacted her field, and where Christian Science was, a driving force in that life. Women of history have also done some, I think, really interesting articles on women involved with women's rights, especially in the early 20th century. The preeminent suffragist in Australia, who really was the driving force in winning suffrage for, at least for white women early in Australia, was a Christian Scientist. Lots of stories like that. So I won't go through the list, but what you do, of course, there's Miss Walter, but here you can view all those articles going back 6 or 7 years. Our second category is something called Ask a Researcher. Remember, I told you lots of people ask us questions. Well, every 2 weeks, we post an answer to one of those questions. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. And the last one we happened to answer and publish something on was asked, what did Mary Baker Eddy say about mental health? There's, as you know, a really important issue in front of us right now, especially, I'd say, for students, secondary and post-secondary students, and faculty, staff at schools at all levels struggling to understand how to respond. We also, pardon me, publish articles from our collections, stuff that we have documents, sometimes objects. We recently published an article about Christian Science communion services. Where do they come from? How did that start? What's that all about? And of course, as you go through this, you'll see, as everybody does, things that are more or less interesting to you. The idea is to have a variety. From the papers is articles that spotlight Mary Baker Eddy's correspondence from a project called the Mary Baker Eddy Papers that I'll come back to briefly. Our last two categories are authentications, which at first might sound a little odd, but we get a lot of questions from people saying, did Mary Baker Eddy write this? Did she say this? Partly because the archives were closed for so long, there was a proliferation of material that circulated purportedly by Mary Baker Eddy. Sometimes it was by her, and we can tell people, yes, this is where it came from. But a lot of times it wasn't by her. It was attributed to her, but at least our ability to trace it shows it does not originate with her. And of course, in one sense, you could say, well, so what? It's still maybe valuable in some way, but it's important, I think, to associate as much as we can, the source with the text. And also what we find is that in some cases, there is a kind of distortion of Christian Science that takes place in these items that are attributed to her. Then finally, we have a category called featured articles. We review books here. We do different things. Some of you may have heard of a recent book called An Annotated Bibliography of Academic and Other Literature on Christian Science. This isn't a product of the Christian Science Publishing Society. It's an independent project of its compilers, but we review it here and do that with other books. So yeah, feel free when you get a chance. I would suggest exploring the articles, and I'll break again here in just a second for discussion and questions. A companion place to check out are our podcasts, and our podcasts, I think, are especially useful for folks, not just folks in the academic world, but they do touch that world quite often. The name of our podcast is Seekers and Scholars. Some of you might be listeners. If you're not, love you to listen. It's monthly, comes out the first of the month. And we do things that run the gamut. They're mostly connected to our collections. And so the latest episode uses Eddy's correspondence from the archives to talk about something that is of interest to many people around the holidays. Sometimes getting together with family is, of course, super fun, but sometimes you're also trying to talk across different kinds of divides, political, social, religious, all kinds. And she had a lot of practice with that, we found out from looking at her correspondence. And then you'll see a number of other things. Some are, well, in the scholarly realm, we do often have guests who come to us from outside the Christian Science movement to talk about something that is also of concern and of interest to Christian Scientists. So this is just an example about American religion in World War II. Kurt Peeler has written, and he's at Florida State. He's written a great book about this, and he did research in our archives. And so there's a lot of good stuff in his book about Christian Scientists in World War II. So that's what that is. Let me just stop sharing. Everybody doing okay? Yeah. Anybody need a standing break? I know we're almost done here, but I don't want to put anybody to sleep. What kind of questions or thoughts, other things coming to mind? Glad to respond or hear your thoughts on anything.
Well, it looks like Barham is trying to speak, but he's muted.
Yeah, that's the story.
I'm unmuted. Okay.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Terry. And my question is, I'm a Christian Scientist and have been a long time, but I wasn't raised in it. I was raised as a Methodist and found out when I was searching in grad school, boy, when that hit my thought, I knew that this is it. So what I want to know is, my wife is a Methodist and she's a Methodist minister.
Nice.
And so how do, I don't know that she wants to hear any lectures from me.
My wife doesn't want to hear any lectures from me either.
But how do I just love her, and I really appreciate her because she started out as an elementary music teacher, and after 20 years said, I'm shifting gears, and she went back and got another master's degree and is now serving a church, a Methodist church in Racine, Wisconsin. And she's
Wonderful.
doing a great job. But how can I be supportive? I suppose it's all, of course, mental, but what are some things? Has anybody faced things? Every once in a while, I realize I go to her church every once in a while to support her. And of course, I miss my own church meeting. But what does anyone have some suggestions for how to be a better husband
Oh,
in this kind of situation?
I think she would probably say you just did it by asking the question. I have a thought for you that's touches it, kind of relates to what we're talking about, touches history a little bit. We've been, I try not to be circuitous about this. Sorry if I'm a little long on some of these responses. We've been working over the last 6 months on we're going to be publishing a history of the Christian Science hymnal. And through all its, there's quite a story here going back to the 1880s and a lot of wonderful music and just all kinds of things up to the present time. But the reason I mention that in connection with what you're saying, Terry, is that one thing that we've really appreciated as we've researched is the presence of hymns from many different traditions. And one thing, maybe it's just a casual mention sometime, or maybe you even look at it together. There are a number of hymns in our hymnal, the Christian Science hymnal, what we're calling in this study, the 1932 hymnal, the one that has, the most prominence in our church.
Yeah.
That are by John or Charles Wesley, the founders of Methodism. As you know, Charles was the hymn writer.
Yes.
He'd be the one who'd, he'd ride into the inn or come home on his horse, and he wouldn't say hello to anybody. He'd jump off his horse and say, pen and ink, because he had to get it down. And so he's written these hymns that are, the heart and soul of Methodism, because, as you probably, not that Methodism, it does have a theology and a teaching, but it's not so concerned with theology per se as with people living their Christian faith. And it's been broad, it's tried to embrace a lot of, kinds of people and ideas. And one way Christian Science has been touched by that, and that we've touched that we've touched Methodism, I'd say, is all these wonderful Wesleyan hymns.
I'm a pianist, and I have played for Christian Science church services for decades.
Yes.
And so I really love all those Methodist hymns, because I remember singing them as a kid in my mother's church.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I realize now you're saying we could share more of what these Charles Wesley hymns are, because he was a brilliant writer, and we should be grateful to have some hymn, quite a few hymns of his. I've played many of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And there, yeah, I realize there's a lot more to your question than that, but as far as a place to share, I see Margaret wanting to get in.
Isn't there a book published by a Methodist minister and his journey from Methodism to Christian Science?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. That's right. Probably depends on the mood your wife is in, because the title could be friendly, or it's a very interesting book, but I think it's called Why I Left the Methodist Pulpit. So maybe there's a certain, but you're exactly right. And I think for one's own background, yeah, to see somebody's journey, how they, how they moved in this direction, because honestly, even 100 and some years in, even if you have maybe, grew up in a Christian Science, as we say, for almost all, you just scratch and you're down to somebody who, in some way found Christian Science, that you were connected to, and from all different churches and backgrounds. And I know for one thing I've thought more about for myself in recent years is two things about that coming into Christian Science that I think have some historical interest more broadly. Is one, what you see a lot in families, it's just someone, somebody who's sort of willing to maybe strike out on their own a little bit. And it doesn't mean that, others in the family, sometimes they do come with, other times they don't. And the other thing is how many people, and this is not the majority, but something that's interested me because I noticed it in my own family, how many people came into Christian Science who were what we would call unchurched. That was the case, I think, with my own family, is basically people really with no religious affiliation. I mean, living in the culture, and so they knew what the Bible was, but I think were either indifferent to or opposed to religion because of what they felt it was. So if anybody needs any kind of thoughtful hope in a, we're constantly being told what a secular age we live in, it's been kind of fascinated me, and we're starting to do some research on this, is how many people we see on their mother church membership applications, not now, but historically, 100 years ago and more, no religious affiliation. Something has touched them, but it's not because they came out of another teaching. Many did, like you did, Terry, but
Yes.
many people did not. So anyway, just something.
What was the name of that book that you said? My
It-
journey from
the Methodist pulpit to Christian Science. And the key word you could get to remember it, Terry, is the author is a guy, as well, Margaret, you could probably tell him, but I'll since I'm yakking, I say the last name is Simonson. Simon, S-E-N, S-I-M-O-N-S-E-N.
Thank you.
We're almost at time, guys. Is there anything else you want me to
Yeah,
do?
Michael,
Talk about? Yes, please, Marty.
do you have any stories on Christian Science organizations? And if not, how we might pursue that with questions to the Mary Baker
Yes.
Eddy Library?
Thank you for asking that, Marty. I have a list of things to talk about, and I won't get to all of them. I went in to look specifically to see if I had records on University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Christian Science organization there. My first pass through the records was, oh, thanks, Gordon, was we don't have any historic records on the organization. You have some of your own, I'm guessing, minute books and things, especially from the days when people were more conscientious minute takers than they tend to be today. But what we've found more generally is, and I can get a founding date for you, University of Wisconsin is one of the early Christian Science organizations. It's founded quite early. And you'd see that in common with others that who you still see yourselves probably kind of in parallel with, such as the University of Michigan, Ohio State University, the University of Iowa, Midwestern powerhouses, University of Minnesota. These all early, what we find is that, as you may know, the very first Christian Science organization emerged at Harvard University, partly just because of proximity. The center of gravity in the early Christian Science movement is there in Boston, but it's spreading, throughout the country in the Midwest by the late 1890s, early 1900s. And the students and faculty and staff at different places, the way the organizations seem to emerge is as sponsors of Christian Science lectures. For all the, what I see sometimes as sort of a tension over today, is Christian Science lecture, is that what we should call it? Is that, lecture, does that mean being lectured to? There's this, ferment around this. The one setting in which the word lecture, I think it has a lot of meaning in a lot of settings, but one place where it has, I think, a lot of its intended meaning is in an academic setting, because every student, has, attends, oh, am I going to lecture or section? If I can get by with just going to section, maybe I don't have to go to the lecture, etc. Yes, Margaret.
If is that, I didn't want to interrupt if there was anything else about student organizations, because I was going to change the subject.
I'll just say a quick other couple of things, and let's be sure we get to it. The organizations seem to emerge primarily earliest because they want to sponsor lectures on their campuses, and there is a need for an internal sponsoring body, but that's not the only reason they emerge. Because early they start to realize that, like other student groups, student clubs, fraternities, sororities, there's value in some kind of a cohesive, organized activity. And they, besides lectures, the lectures seem to come first. And then a lot of this is very organic, by the way. It becomes, more organized, more, set, but the idea of testimony meetings seems like super adaptable from a church setting to a college or university setting. You don't need a lot of people. You can, the duties of preparing and sharing readings can be shared. There's a lot about it that's like super flexible. And I will say that, while we sometimes may look to a bygone era, think, oh, there were so many more people involved. Yes, we have definitely had our ups and downs with that. But the beginnings of Christian Science organizations are not, at least what I can see, are not based on large numbers of students coming together in different colleges and universities. They do tend to grow at times when college and university enrollment grows and all that, but it's oftentimes, it's just a few, faculty and a couple of students who will organize themselves. And they're, as organizations have often been, they're kind of missionary minded in some ways. At times almost more than the branch churches, though that's just a case of local climate, I think. But, because the idea is like shares with like, students invite their roommates, their friends. It's always been like that. So they start early. It starts at Harvard, but the Midwestern schools, I'd say, and then the University of California are probably the real leaders in starting these little circles of activity. And I think one thing that may also be, besides the development of Christian Science in the Midwest, especially the upper Midwest, is that, as you know, I'm sorry, some of you will know more about this at Wisconsin than I do, but because coeducation comes early in the Midwest at the universities, women are allowed to attend early, earlier than in the Northeast, for instance. Women can play a role in the Christian Science organizations. Where at Harvard, it's a long time before that's possible, comparatively speaking. Margaret, I don't want to ignore you. Go for it. We can change topic and then we're going to be out of time.
I just enjoyed so much visiting, the new displays downstairs at the Publishing Society, and help participate in a scanning project for the Committee on Publication. And here's so many wonderful comments about the displays now on the main floor. And for those that haven't been able to see that, I just wondered, if you had numbers of, how many, you said 14,000 on the website, but how many, are coming through that are seeing that exhibit and then seeing the maparium, or then maybe being sent up to the fourth floor where the research unit is, and they, at least the, comments that I'm reading on Twitter and other places, they're all so positive about how helpful your staff is and responsive and open. And I just wanted to share how wonderful those exhibits are, and how helpful I think they are to anyone who can get to Boston. And particularly I hear or read about the electronic, the amazing technology that is being used to make these articles and history more accessible to people.
Thank you so much for saying that. I kind of on my list, and you got it there. I probably don't need to say anything else except yes, we're so appreciative. You did ask about, the kind of traffic that is coming through, and it's very robust. A lot of people come to Boston and know about the maparium, and I think the idea has been, the maparium is wonderful, but it needs to exist in a context. What is this about? Why is it here? It's more than just a beautiful thing. And they've tied it to the Christian Science Monitor in a beautiful way. And also there's a really good section available to people on Mary Baker Eddy and the Christian Science movement. And we were thrilled to work with the designers over a period of 4 or 5 years to bring this forth, and it's busy. We're trying to portray some of what's there on our website, although that's just a little piece of it. I see we're coming to time, and I promised I wouldn't keep anybody because I know busy days and busy lives. Marty, let me just turn it back over to you with thanks so much for everybody's engagement, your thoughts, and your interest. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank
We
you, Michael.
appreciate your time and your wisdom and all the information that you shared with us today. And we look forward to hitting your website lots, and also hopefully visiting, as Margaret had said. If there are no other comments or questions, we will adjourn the annual meeting of the Student Center Foundation, one of the foremost organizations in the country, as you just said, with being an early starter, early pioneer. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. We'll see you next year.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you all. Stay warm.
Okay.
Oh,
Thanks so much,
need to.
Michael.